services. It continues the city's investment in in the response to the opioid epidemic. It continues our public safety agencies at historically high levels. And we continue in this budget to make really transformational investments in our public infrastructure as we enter in this budget, really the second half of the third year and the beginning of the fourth year of our sustainable infrastructure plan, as well as make progress on a number of other city infrastructure projects. And we are proposing to do all that without utilizing the new taxing authority that the people of Burlington voted to give us with the resolution of the Burlington Telecom lawsuit and the recovery of $7 million of funds. This budget does propose to use $2 million of those funds to do two things. One, to allow the people of Burlington to receive some direct financial benefit from having followed through and made and finished this job, and two, an investment in more than $1 million worth of 8 new snow plows, sidewalk plows, which will improve the city's response during storms. We definitely suffered this year in some storms from the fact of how old this fleet is, with some of our machines being out of commission for as much as 50% of the time during snowstorms. So, at a high level, those are some of the highlights. We'll get into each of those details at the right time as we get into the various presentations. I was going to hand it over now to Beth to talk, do some additional sort of overarching, just make sure we're all on the same page about kind of where we are in the process. We did the process a little bit differently this year, and Beth was going to speak to that.
Thank you.
Great, go for it.
Great. So I thought I'd take a minute just to remind everyone of kind of the process we took to get here, because we did it a little differently this year than in some of the more recent years. In kind of response to feedback after developing these budgets together a couple of years, there was a request by the Board of Finance to start the process sooner, to bring some more information about the budget at an earlier time to give a chance for feedback. So what we did was to start this process earlier in the fall, and typically, and some of you know this and some of you don't, so I'll just go quickly, is typically what happens is we will reach out to the department heads and ask them to put together their first pass at their department budgets, right? So they are not handed a budget. They are asked to kind of present a budget for what their needs would be. We do central budgeting of things like healthcare and salaries, but otherwise it really does come from the departments. And then we kind of put together a picture of what it looks like, see how big it is, how small it is, and try to kind of look at ways of getting, tends to come in bigger than we know is possible, and try to kind of get the budget to a more comfortable place. What we did this year was then came to Board of Finance for a number of meetings, and then also Council in January to talk through what we were seeing as kind of trends and needs for 2020. So we, presented a picture of where we thought revenues would be up, expenses might be up or down, and what our kind of new need would be for the year. We had identified a need for additional revenues beyond what we would be seeing from the existing tax base or changes in gross receipts, things like that. Had talked about a need for about 1.8 in spending, in new spending. There was understandably anxiety about a tax increase of that size, and we talked about means of kind of taking that number down. And I think what we achieved was in a number of ways is going back and working with the departments to try to level set budgets to their 2019 where we could, kind of acknowledging that we had had surpluses in recent years and there was probably some room to accommodate monies within the budgets. We also went over in January a number of items where we could use fund balance to fund some of the needs, so we would not have to increase the ask for taxes. So what we where we netted out at that point was going to the public for a tax increase of 1.25 cents, talking about using the untapped authority. Just as a reminder, in this budget does assume we will ask to take, we have almost a half cent in authority that we hadn't been using prior to the increase in authority. So to go back to the municipal rate of 0.2604 would get us back, so we would want to ask for that as an increase to the public. And then had really netted to an area where we were going to use about $1.8 million of fund balance to gap the budget. I think the good news is what's presented here. Since we did that presentation in January, we've obviously had more experience with 19, have a better sense of revenues, where the grand list is going to fall out. And due to a variety of, fortunately, positive changes, I think this budget, we were able to do a good job of kind of reducing that need for the ask on the unassigned fund balance by about $500,000. So I think that's a good thing. So where we had talked about maybe some quasi-operational items maybe being used for fund balance or done in a different way, I think we've been able to accommodate them within the general fund budget and not have to use fund balance for that. Trying to think, just to give you a sense, I'm happy to go into detail or talk to anyone separately. We've seen we've had better than expected return on the investments. We've had cash to actually leave in CDs, so that's led to some income for us. Gross receipts is a little bit up, pilots will be up. We have a couple of new revenue sources. The BT building, the 200 Church Street, we will now get rent on that, whereas we've been paying rent for that building, marina, sailing center, things like that. So the amounts added up. We did see, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, health. We had some high claims for a couple of months, so we're kind of budgeting that up. Workers' comp as well. We're not seeing big claims, but we are seeing payout on claims that have existed. So we're increasing those budgets this year too. But again, I think in all, it's positive. The departments really worked hard to keep their budgets pretty much level funded, except for some of the items which we had talked about in January. And again, I think we were able to decrease the draw, so that's positive. Yes.
Sorry. Thank you. So I just wanted to ask one first procedurally, how do you want to do this in terms of questions that people have? Do you want to do them as we go through, or save it till the end?
Yeah, I think if you've got sort of high-level questions now before we start the departmental budget, we can do that, but it's really up to you. We also, certainly as we're going through the individual presentations, the given direction to the presenters to try to keep their presentations to about half the allocated time, so there's time for questions.
So the one question I did want to ask, and it was asked for those people that are on the Board of Finance or were at Board of Finance meetings, and so actually Councilor Pine alluded to this at our last meeting, was that we really haven't had a conversation as a council about the proceeds from Burlington Telecom, and there is still the discussion about the potential for carried interest. I don't know if how people feel about the idea of taking a significant portion of that and putting it into a capital investment, such as something that is clearly needed, which is sidewalk plows. And obviously it's not being used for operational expenses, it's a capital investment. But it is a capital investment that will is worth more today than it will be 5 years from now. So the question is whether or not that is something that, from a philosophical point of view, the council wants to do with the proceeds from, which is clearly a one-time event. And I don't know if the intention was to, and I don't know how conversations have been either with you, with the council president or whatever. I haven't had that conversation about whether or not that is something that, from a philosophical point of view, we're prepared to do and move forward with it in that way. So, as I say, it has been also mentioned by others, but for the benefit of those that haven't been privy to those conversations, I'm just wondering where that stands.
Councilor Busher?
So I raised the question because I initially, then Councilor Pine raised it here, but my understanding was that in the process that when we actually got those dollars, that the council had some decisions to make, and that the council, it was going to be the council that was going to decide how those monies would be utilized. And so this may be consistent with what the council wants or not, and I felt, for me, it was, I wasn't planning to bring this up right now, although it is consistent with your high-level overview, because I do have some questions about if we didn't use those proceeds. I have some other suggestions, but anyways, I just wanted to understand if I'm spot on with the processes, like Councilor Paul said, that, you know, the council really needs to allocate those funds and decide whether or not to reinvest all of them or to divide. I have not talked to anybody at all until this spreadsheet came out that we saw, and that prompted the conversation, because and when you made your State of the City address, that certainly, I wrote that down immediately, Mr. Mayor, and went, I just wanted to understand how you saw this. And
Great, I'm happy to speak to that. I certainly think there's a decision that the council and the administration will need to do together about whether we want to invest any funds in the new Burlington Telecom. And my position is what I've articulated to the council in the past, which is that I am open to there being some level of investment if a majority of the council wants to do that. I would not be supportive personally, or as the administration is not supportive of investing all $7 million that we've recovered in what essentially is, you know, a speculative investment in a private telecom. I'm open to doing some of that. And my proposal to you, which I did mention in the State of the City and tried to kind of flag it for the council, is that this is direction that we're proposing. And I have had conversations with many councilors before and since then. I think there is a fair amount of support on the council for this, but it is ultimately going. What I'm saying to you is the budget I'm presenting to you. My current intention, is to have about $2 million of the $7 million paying for two things: avoiding a tax increase and purchasing these much-needed snowplows. That leaves $5 million, which is considerably more than the amount that we need to make the minimum level of investment to secure a board seat in the new Burlington Telecom. And I think gives us quite a bit to discuss over the next, and the clock is ticking, and the council, I think if the council does want to have a discussion about this, we should get that organized and going relatively soon, because we have a year from the closing, so we're down to about 7 months left for the council to decide if it does want to make that investment, which is plenty of time still. That is still a conversation that we have lots of resources to have and take that option if we choose to. If the council doesn't agree and wants to reserve all $7 million for that future decision, that's fine too. There will be these holes then in the budget that we'll have to find a way to replace either through cuts or through a tax increase.
So I think from my perspective, what I'm really proposing is that the council with the administration have that conversation. And it would be good to have that before we divide up the monies, that's all. Okay. I just think that as far as a process, I think it would be good to understand, because as I said, I haven't really talked to anybody about this, so I know how I feel, but I don't know how anyone else feels. So, and I think, collectively, we all have maybe different perspectives. So anyways, thank you.
Okay. President Wright?
So I sort of take this as the beginning of that conversation. And I think we do need to have that conversation. I do remember in the discussions with the Board of Finance leading up to the proposed tax increase, that I think we all were concerned for Burlington voters with all what happened in November, the cost of the $70 million bond for schools, for the Burlington High School, et cetera, that we were concerned about the size of the increase. But some of us, I know, wanted to see if we could have no increase. And some of the things we explored was the unassigned fund balance, cutbacks in different departments or whatever, and also I know that I mentioned the Burlington Telecom settlement. And what I was told at the time was, we think there's money coming, but obviously we didn't have a settlement. Now we do have a settlement, and for me, I agree with Councilor Busher, we need to have that discussion. I think this is the start of that. I would not want, I think that it's good for us to live up to our commitment to the voters that we would not call up the tax increase if we could avoid it. And I think that if we do the tax increase while we get this money, I think it will not look like we lived up to that commitment. That's $1.5 million of it, basically, right? Is the tax increase?
The tax increase is about 450,000 of it. The $1.2 million,
it's the other
$1.2 million
reference,
is
right.
the snowplows.
What if where would we be if we did not spend the money on the snowplows?
We're proposing buying 8 of them. If we buy them all now, as soon as the budget is approved, we will get them at a discounted rate, and they will be here, and all of them would be here in time for next spring, I believe is the plan right now. There was at one point talk of doing it over 2 years, but I think they accelerated that to do it.
They could be here for fall.
They'd be here for the fall. All of the 8 that we have something like, I believe, when DPW is here, we can probe into this further. I think we have 11 active sidewalk plows, and then we have 2 more that sort of sit there like, we have there for scrap, and the 8 that we're talking about replacing are all over 10 years old, is my understanding, and my further understanding, and this might not be exactly right in detail, but is that basically those 8 spent about half the time in the shop during snowstorms, and it's not just the downtime. These older machines, when they get beat up, it has an impact on our crews as well. It's as these get older, and there's a lot of banging and jostling around, and that gets worse as these machines get older. So it is something there's considerable. There are operational benefits too, and there are benefits to our team to going forward with this. So what would happen? We just wouldn't replace all. If we wanted to only spend half the money, we would only replace 4 of these really overly aged.
Okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I'm in favor of not calling up the tax increase. I think we should avoid that, as we said that we would try to. I do want to have a deeper dive into the trucks.
Mr. Mayor, so, and Beth, you.
Not to say that I'm not supporting it, but I want to have a deeper.
No, I hear where you're at, and thank you for recognizing, President Wright, that I think this is the way we start to engage this.
So you said that you have around $500,000 of unassigned fund balance that you're not going to draw down on. And the BT proceeds to offset the increase is $464,000. So to me, it's using money, one-time money, to use for operations costs, and I don't see why we wouldn't just use the same unassigned fund balance and not necessarily use the BT proceeds. I don't see any difference in that. I see just going with the unassigned fund balance. So that's, and then as far as the tractors, then I'll shut up, is I think that, another option would be to bond for them because they're capital, so.
I think it's a fair point, Councilor Bush, and as we get deeper into the conversation, I think it's fair to have that on the table. I do think, one of the other things I think the council is going to want to talk about is what we are allocating unassigned fund balance to, and not all of those, their decisions are fully made, and that, savings you're projecting could, by the time we get to the end of this process, there could be a shift there. But I take your point. Councilor Tracy.
Following up on that, if this clarify if this is a structural issue, or is this gonna be, that would continue in coming years in terms of these costs, like where we might have to, where if we use one-time money, we plug the hole for this year, but then that same hole would exist the next year? Is that correct, and we'll have to address that again next year? Or is that, or
Well, the sidewalk plows are capital items. I mean, eventually you're gonna need to replace them, but these should be good for, a substantial period of time. And, the tax money would be a one-time relief.
So we have to figure out something else for the year?
Yes.
Item 6.
Although, I mean, just sorry,
No, no.
there's just the authority, just to, as a refresher, especially we have, sorry, I don't mean to, it's worth remembering, and it might not be obvious, not taxing at the full authority in one year does not mean you give up that ability to tax at that rate in future years. So we are not, we still have that authority from the voters to replace that hole next year if we don't have this capital source for it.
Okay, so you don't have to go back and get it year after year.
That's right. And in fact, and we've got a record now. I mean, it's been kind of an exciting part of these budgets in recent years. We have for, I think 3 or 4 years now, not taxed at the full authority that we were at even before this most recent increase. We are proposing to, right now, and this is something else the council could weigh in on, if what we are proposing, if this wasn't clear in the way I first laid this out, we are proposing using the authority that we had prior to this year, but have not been fully using in recent years. It's confusing, but do you understand what I'm saying? We are going up to that prior level with this draft budget. We are not using the new $450,000 of authority that the voters gave us.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if you want to get a sense, I mean, these are rough, but document 6 in the list are projections for the next 2 years, just to give you a sense of, we know what bargaining is going to cost because we know what the contracts look like. So it does give you a sense of what things will look like.
Okay, thank you very much.
President Wright.
Just following up on Councilor Chase. So how long can we call up the authority to call that? Might mean 10 years from now? There must be a,
No, it's a permanent, well,
It is our authority to use. The only thing that will change is, and you know this without complicating it, in '22, we will have the reappraisal, which will change our grand list, and our tax rates will have to change to keep it budget neutral, basically, revenue neutral, tax-wise. So
would you sort of
rates-
prorate it?
Yeah, you do kind of by the CLA that you adjust the properties by, you kind of then adjust your tax rate by that CLA.
So if we were not taxing at our full authority,
So if we were taxing it,
Yeah.
if our, right, so we would still keep the authority, but the actual number would change.
I have to say, I'm not a big fan of this. I mean, I understand that it's because voters approved this for this year, and now if we don't use it, that's good. But a couple of years from now, voters might feel differently about it. They might say, hey, you know what, tougher times, economy's bad, I don't want to do it now. I don't know, but I won't belabor that point.
okay, so Councilor Paulino.
So I've been wondering this question, maybe I missed it, but so can I assume that like about 450 to 500,000 is the tax increase if we passed it in full every year? Like to the
So it depends, so it's based on the grand list, so it's 1.25 cents for the grand list, so for this year it would be about 464,000.
That would not be another increase next year. It would just be taxed at the same level next year.
Right.
And in fact, there would be this is actually something that is not intuitive about it. Property taxes are different than pretty much all other government taxes in that they do not rise with inflation. They only rise as there is new investment or real growth in the grand list, or a change in the levy amount is made and a change in the tax rate is amount. So if a certain house is paying, as a result of this, the increase last year is paying $10,000 for their taxes, that they're still paying on the municipal taxes the same $10,000 the next year unless they either invest in their home and expand the value of the property, or there is a rate increase, if you follow me. I'm feeling we probably, in the interest of time, might need to get to the departmental presentations, unless, did you have anything else to kick us off, Beth?
Can I just tell everyone what's in their packet? I do not
Go
want
for
to
it.
go, but just
Yeah.
so everyone knows, right? So you will have the projections if anyone wants to see how the future years look. You have the full budget. The last page is also kind of a projection of what the tax rate would be. That projection assumes the
In your
additional-
overview?
Yes.
Is that,
just
oh,
in my
sorry,
last
okay,
in my overview
sorry,
inside
okay.
the full packet. It does show what it would look like if we did take that half cent of the original authority to go up to that amount. There is an increase in, I'm sorry, it's a CCT, so it's a GMT tax. That is a fixed tax based upon their budget. And their budget is going up this year. Our paratransit use, College Street Shuttle, there's been some big increases in costs. And it does have a placeholder, and you'll see, I think it's in yellow on the page for the retirement. We have the valuation, we're meeting with the retirement board to get a final approval on that, so that's an estimate. I think it's probably a pretty close estimate of where things will come in for retirement. Good news is though, and we can go into more detail at a future Board of Finance meeting, is we've been able to, because of some changes in our experience study and kind of what we've seen, we have changed our assumed rate of return down. We had a pretty high rate of return, which was ultimately going to start ultimately was setting unrealistic target for how much we would make on our investment each year. So we've rate sized to 7.5, so down by a full half cent. So will help us kind of, as we're looking forward to kind of be in better shape kind of toward the fund balance, toward the unassigned fund balance in retirement. So there's a good story there.
You're gonna give us a little more in-depth on that, or I can ask outside of this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry, are we going straight to HR now, or are you doing anything more, or the overview? Okay. Okay. If there are no more kind of high-level questions, obviously we got, again, for people who haven't been through the process before, we have these, there's a lot more engagement between now and when this budget gets to you in mid-June. We have these 4 budget meetings over this week and next, and then the Board of Finance typically has met on the budget at least once or twice. Generally at least twice, I would say, after that, before we finalize the mayor's budget and deliver that to the full council by June 15th. So, and we're currently, I think our expectation would be that the
vote on the 17th, the meeting on the 17th.
as soon as, it doesn't, there's nothing, the charter does not require, the charter assumes that the council acts sometime in the last 2 weeks of June. So it could be at either the meeting on the 17th or the 24th, or the already scheduled meeting. So, all right, with that, let's go to I guess so we're gonna do your department first.
Yes.
Okay, and
It's always been done, I just followed.
Yeah.
great.
So, Beth gave a really good overview. For the departments, by and large, we're gonna have 15 minutes to speak. My name is
We have 5
Rich
minutes to
Goodwin.
speak, 10 minutes for questions.
I'll do it in
Okay.
5 minutes or less. So again, it's
Poor
Rich
Rich.
Goodwin, Director of Financial Operations. I have a slideshow that's 7 slides. I should be able to get through it in the 5 minutes. Again, we're the Clerk Treasurer's Office. These are the functions that we do, we historically have done. The only thing that I would say that we put a little bit more emphasis over the last few years is, purchasing, trying to generate some savings there, whether it be new revenue streams or expenses. This is the Clerk Treasurer's Office. This is the existing staff as is. As of Monday, we hired a new payroll manager. Her name is Lori Thompson, so it's good to fill that position. What's unique about, I'd say, the Clerk Treasurer's Office, I did some homework, and in the last 20 years, we are the only department of the city that has not grown FTE counts. In fact, our FTE counts today is less than it was in the year 2000, so that's something that result of, streamlining our processes, finding better ways to do things, and just fully utilizing our staff. So proud of that. This is a great little overview of the Clerk Treasurer's Office. Revenues and expenses year over year, it's been pretty much flat. meaning less than 0% growth, especially in the expense side. Interesting enough, even with steps and even with COLAs, we've been able to keep those expenses to grow less than 1% for the 20 budget. The other piece which is unique to the clerk treasurer's office, we're actually a revenue stream. Revenues exceed our expenses, which is something we're really proud of. I don't know too many other clerk treasurer's office that has a revenue stream that's larger than that of expense. Here are some of the revenue generators that we're looking at for 20. Licensing fee, we're looking at electronic invoicing, more and more on overall purchasing savings. There's a few other items here which, I'll take a peek at it, read through it. Expenses, we're constantly looking for ways to reduce our expenses. You'll notice there's a drop in the election line item, and it's a direct result that we only have 2 elections that we have to do in FY20, but we had 3 in FY19. And again, we're talking about new technology for our payroll, and you're going to be seeing within 6 weeks or less some form, most likely, of a savings memo for the purchasing department. So again, that's a highlight of the expense and drivers. Audit findings, really there were no audit findings for fiscal year 18. They were all recommendations. There were 6 of them, of which all 6 of the recommendations that our auditors stated that we should look at, we've taken steps. I'm hoping that we have no reoccurring recommendations for the new year. And again, here's a few more initiatives that we're looking to do. It's pretty straightforward, but again, it's going to hopefully generate some new revenues, reduce our expenses, and that's all I have.
Nice job.
Any questions with that under 5?
That was great.
Okay.
I have a quick question. You talked about a retirement solution. Let me just look at that. Onboard new outsourcing solution for retirement administration. So at some point, can we get a little more information on that? You don't have to do it tonight, but there was one other thing. Kronos timekeeping, is that not citywide, or?
So right now, we've deployed Kronos through the city. We're about halfway deployed.
I see.
And we're going to be putting together a game plan this is how we're going to achieve the goal. We will deploy the Kronos timekeeping system citywide. That's what we're going to be looking to do. So again, we're going to make it happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I got Councilor Tracy, and then Councilor Paul, and then Councilor Roof.
So I was interested about the licensing piece of things, because I look at that figure and I think about like it being, that feels a little low to me, the 137 in terms of revenues.
So that is just the vital record, so it's like birth certificates, dog licenses, things like that.
Okay, so
Does that
it's
help?
not the like.
It's not permitting, like
Not-
building permitting or.
Not the encumbrances.
No, no,
Okay.
those are actually in the DPW budget, but no. DPW
Okay,
is
great.
not.
Thank you very much, because I was like, that seems strange and.
Totally fair question, yep.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate it.
Not bad, yeah.
Great, Councilor Paul.
Thanks. So, this will cover July 1 to June 30th of 2020, which means that it doesn't cover the election in 2020. Now, you say there's 2 elections budgeted. One of them is town meeting day, I'm presuming, right?
And
Is
absolutely, and there's a placeholder in case, we're still evaluating with the waterfront TIF running out, we would have to have an election by end of this year to be able to bond in time for the expiration, for the last date of assumed debt. So it's a placeholder in case there's a decision to do something around.
So it's by the end of the year. So what you're saying is that if we decided to do any additional TIF bonding, it would have to be before the end of the calendar year 2019.
Or close to.
Yeah.
Because the last date to actually issue the bonds is June 30th? June 30th next year?
That's correct.
June 30th of 2020.
Right.
So that's what you've got the $40,000 placeholder for that? Okay. And then the other is, I noticed that you have a rollout of paperless invoicing. Now, there was a resolution some time ago about looking into consolidated billing. I know I've spoken with you that I probably spoken with you enough that it sounds a bit like a broken record, but whether or not that was still a possibility in terms of initiatives going forward. There's a number of people that, when I say consolidated billing, for those who don't know, I'm talking about the fact that there's a lot of people who would like to be able to pay, say, their electric bill, their DPW water bill, et cetera, from a consolidated point of view.
As those departments are looking at new technology, so it's largely DED and water, they are looking at ways to put them on the same platform to be able to do that. It's not going to be a fix in the next 8 months, but they are working together to try to find solutions.
So is that what you're, so when you talk about rollout of paperless invoicing, are you talking about invoicing for us as a business to our vendors, or are you talking about to the community?
So the paperless invoicing, or I call it electronic invoicing, is something that we've already deployed at the airport, and very simply, we no longer enter invoices. We scan them.
It's invoices for us to pay.
All right, so this is not to the, this is this is internal, okay. All right.
Huge, but a huge operational savings. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. So you've already started that in one department to sort
And,
of.
yeah, we're gonna review the results, but basically what we're finding is that instead of, the airport, they have one person that enters all the payables, and it takes them 15 hours per week, and we got it down with the new system that it's only taking 5. So if we go department by department, there's a great opportunity for one, savings of staff time, and that, for what it's worth, we're able to deploy that at no cost to the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, you're welcome.
My question's about the taxi fees. I know that when we were contemplating that ordinance in the 25%, 25 cent per ride piece, what we're bringing in is more than we expected. And I'm just wondering where that surplus is going. I know that in the budget overview document, there was what seemed to be a $40,000 increase to match up what we're actually showing. Is that in this budget? 'Cause I know that the clerk treasurer's office has a role on it to some degree.
Taxi fees are in our budget, yes.
So the answer is yes.
So we did analysis, it takes a lot of time to administer that program,
It does.
Staff time, and so we had done those initial numbers, right? We've upped them every year, and I think it's time to do, it's probably been about a year, it's time to do another one. It was paying for itself with the quarter. We still have earmarked, to hire the part-time, enforcement officer,
yeah.
which is an additional cost on top of that. So I think we can do that analysis again. I think the guidance though was, those fees were not set so they could only cover. It was kind of the guideline so we could have some sort of benefit from those too. And I think we would want to keep those fees where they are because there's been some, police have said that they could see wanting to change that enforcement officer to be full-time instead of part-time.
Yes.
So I think we want to kind of get that person hired and feel out how that goes before we make any commitments to what that looks like.
We got close to a hire. I think we may have
We did
actually
have a
hired
hire.
someone, and then it wasn't able to work out. And one of the reasons was that it was only part-time, and so just to be clear on this, any surplus above what was expected can be used for other purposes beyond the administration of that program.
Not, in this year, we're not budgeting to use more of that surplus because we don't have someone, but we could in future years, like, look to use the additional revenues that are coming in to fund that.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Good. Any last thoughts? If there's no further questions, let's go to Deanna. I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to meet our new HR director yet. And I guess you all confirmed her, didn't you? So you met her at least on confirmation night. So welcome, Deanna. It's been a great relief, I would say, to the City Hall team to have a new colleague here, and welcome to your first budget presentation.
All right, I'm so excited. So good evening. Thanks for taking some time to look at the budget. And thank you, Beth, for all your help in putting it together. So this is our current team. I call it the small but mighty team because we do a lot with a few resources. And so we've had a number of openings. One was my role that's now but filled. And then we had an HR manager leave, and we've got an open role for talent diversity and training and doing some recruiting and hiring as well. Those are all open positions that are already approved, so no change there. And then for our 20 budget, this is the budget of just our overall team, and I'm not expecting any increases on the budget from year over year, except for just the overall 2% in the wages and salaries. I do intend to spend more of my budget than I did last year, or that we did last year, just because we were underspent, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you look at the budget in the salary and wages, employee benefits, the red bar there is the 20 budget. The blue sliced bar is last year's budget, and then the subsequent ones are 2017-18 actuals, and then the short bar is, of course, the 2019 that hasn't been spent, and then the last bar is the budget that I intend to spend. So I'll be under budget on both of those areas, and again, I intend to spend probably more than last year, but not over the budget. And then these are the other areas. We've got professional consulting, travel and training, office utilities, and capital leases, and you can see I'm underspent for last year. And I'll probably be underspent again this year, but I do have some plans for the training and travel and professional and consulting more than last year, and flat on the other ones. So this is just an overview. I won't go over the entire list, and it's not extensive, but just the overall services. So we're a service organization for our employees and managers in the city, and these are some of the things that we do around compensation and benefits, operation and compliance, employee and labor relations, talent management, recruiting, and diversity and inclusion. And some of these items maybe we weren't doing in the past, or that I'm adding to the list. But this is kind of an overview of the things that we do as a team. And then here are some of the focus areas that I have for 2019 and 2020. Not all of them are really budget related, but they're just some of the things that, as in the 6 weeks that I've been here, that I've been trying to focus on. And certainly, first of all, is to staff my team, and to do some internal training amongst the team members. We've already started some process documentation and process improvement methodologies, where we're looking at our internal processes in order to build in some efficiencies and documentation and make it easier for our managers and our folks that are using our services to understand what needs to be done, as well as make some improvements on things like onboarding and offboarding. I've got total compensation analysis on there. Nobody get nervous. I'm not going to make any huge changes this year, but I would like to do some analysis on where we are as far as being competitive with our comp and benefits in order to get the staffing and the skills that we need. So I think that will be in that consultant budget. I've got to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, so there'll be activity there, our records management, training, succession planning. And then the bottom one is employee wellness, which is actually, we have some money in the budget in later on in the budget, but it is one of my priorities for this year. And just lastly, I want to ensure that City of Burlington is an employer of choice for people that we're trying to recruit and the people that are here.
Councilor Roof?
Perfect segue. I'm curious about recruitment, and I know I had the benefit of seeing the city's first equity plan, equity report rather, that came out. And one of the things that stood out to me was learning about our workforce, 7% of which are employees that are people of color. Right. And I'm wondering what pieces in this budget or plans that you have from a department standpoint to do recruitment in a way to get that number up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's necessarily a huge budget item. It's more of a probably change in how we go about that, but agreed. I think that we'd want to be closer to the 15% that the Burlington residents for diversity versus the 7%. And so some of the things that I'm thinking about to do that is to create employee resource groups, to have this equity and inclusion advisory board, which is already in play, but I think to do really put some targets in place with those. and to look at how we're recruiting. So where are we recruiting is one of the large items on ways that you can tackle that. So to have a wider scope in where you try to advertise where our job openings are, and making sure that we're connecting with some of the diversity network groups, we're connecting with colleges and universities, and so that we can get a really diverse slate of candidates coming in. So that could have some budgetary elements to it as far as going to job fairs and things like that.
To the degree that there are, on a going forward basis, some budget shifts that would help drive that mission, I for one, in the future would be happy to support those.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we had Counselor Busher and then Counselor Tracy.
Thank you. You said something about, so I just want clarification, when you talked about total compensation analysis, you don't mean just for your department, you mean for the entire city?
That's for the entire city.
Yes, that's what I thought. I
Right.
wanted to just get clarity on that. So with the 2 open positions, do you feel that the training budget is going to be adequate for you? Because I worried a little bit about that. You know, because one's a manager, and then you've got the diversity and training manager also. So I just felt that I wasn't sure. I know you plan to do a lot of in-house training, but that takes time too, and I didn't know whether you had to backfill, and I just was trying to figure out if that was an adequate amount of money.
Thank you for asking. I think from the training perspective, all of the departments have their own training budgets, and then we have our own training budget that we use both for our in-house training as well as maybe some other citywide type of training. So at this point, I feel like it would be adequate in the 6 weeks that I've been here. So because I'm looking across the organizations and they have room in their budget. So this role's job would be to coordinate that training, so go out across the city and identify what are the training needs and help bring some of those trainings to the table. But it would come out of the individual department budgets.
And I understand that, and I'm more focused on, and I appreciate, you know, you're responsible for everybody in the city, but I'm looking at your specific department and wondering if you yourself have enough money in that training budget to adequately support the new individuals that you will be bringing into your department. So that's one question that I had. And then I wasn't quite sure, last year, and it shows up in this graph, maybe, I don't know if I saw it last year and just didn't realize, but professional and consultant dollars have certainly jumped up in that last year, and then you just parallel them this year. I don't really know why there was such a huge increase. So I'd be interested, once again, these are questions and they don't all have to be answered right on the spot, but I would like to understand it, so I understand the budget more and what's driving that. Okay.
Some of that was the check that I looked at.
Okay, yeah, so the NeoGov transformation, so we moved into a new recruiting tool. So I don't understand maybe all of the particulars of the history, so I can get back to you on some of those. But I do, what my plan is going forward to spend that on is some of the analysis that I talked about the total compensation, or any kind of consulting that we might need for particular individual type of issues that come up.
Thank you. I think it's really hard to get hired right at the time that you have to put together a budget and don't really have a history. So I think, you know, what we're trying to do is we'll try to support you in any way we can, just trying to protect you and make sure that the budget that you inherited is a good one. Beth, of course, knows it inside out, but anyways, that's all I'm trying to, that's my point. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. Counselor Tracy?
Thank you for the presentation, really appreciate it. I want to sort of follow on Councilor Roos' points about recruitment and recruitment. I also want to talk about the retention piece, because I think it's not just about getting people here, but about making them feel really valued and part of a team. And so I want to understand a little bit more about what an employee resource group is and how that might make people across the socioeconomic spectrum feel valued and part of that they're part of the city, that they're valued, and that we don't have bias incidents or other things coming into the workplace.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I think retention is really important. We spend a lot of money to recruit people and get them in, so we want them to stay. There's a few different ways that the employee resource groups can help that, that I'm hoping for. And one of those employee resource groups is outside of the diversity, could be a new hire network, and we've got a few people that are really have actually, that I've been speaking to, that are interested in participating in that. So one, it would be a group that could help with some of the recruiting, either to participate in the interview process, so that we ensure that we have a diverse group of people that are doing the interviewing or on the interview panels. The second piece is a group that can be a welcoming body or a social network for folks when especially if they're coming in from out of town, but either for the new hire network or for the particular groups. So let's say it's a women's group or an African American group or an Asian group, et cetera, that they can help them sort of navigate for those over those first few months. So that's one of the pieces around the diversity groups that can help people feel welcome when they arrive. But the other piece around attrition is on some of the onboarding. I think that's also going to help, and around the process around that, and helping people really get a good start when they arrive, so that they feel that comfortable when they get here, that they know what's expected, and that is also a smoother process than it is today.
Thank you for that.
Just before we move on, it's just worth noting that Deanna has experience with this in her past jobs, and I thought it was one of the standout elements of her application was the success with it. The program that she founded at her last company actually ended up winning a fairly significant award for its effectiveness within the industry of promoting inclusion and diversity. So we're excited about this. I think it's a big new initiative.
No, it sounds awesome. I really appreciate you providing a little bit more meat to that, because it's really interesting. Really appreciate your work on that. CAO Anderson referenced workers' comp claims kind of going up, and I'm just wondering if this piece on employee wellness might, I don't know what is driving that particularly, but I'm wondering if there's a wellness component to that, and if a little bit of proactivity on the wellness side might help us to cut down some of those costs. So can you maybe speak to how you view the employee wellness program, and and if it's possible through that program to potentially address some of that, or if that's not really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the final presentations is going to go through some of the Workmans Comp data. Is that true? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
A lot of data, but yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure. But yeah, absolutely. Philosophically, I mean, I think if you focus on employee wellness, and it can help to reduce injuries. There is a wellness committee, and I quite honestly, it's I've only been to one of their meetings, and there is a budget that's associated with that. So I think that is the focus of that group, is how can we improve wellness, and connecting that to what are the types of things that are happening that we can help to improve the health, either in Workman's Comp's claims or even our overall medical claims.
You don't mind if I just?
No, please do.
We did this year hire, this current year, and continue an actual safety officer who's working largely with DPW and Parks right now, and who's going to start to look more citywide, so under the BED model, to really focus on some of the areas where we've seen claims. So I think that, and this budget you saw includes some money for her to spend, kind of to encourage these programs too. So I mean, we are concerned. I mean, and I don't want anyone to worry. Like, we haven't seen an uptick in incidents. We've had some, people are deciding to have the surgery, and that's what the costs are. So we are not seeing we don't have a worrying trend that we have a growing safety problem. Things are just getting expensive.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
One of the things we've done in BTV Stat a couple times is to try to model out a fair amount of it. I just want to reassure the council, a fair amount of attention is paid both by the HR team, the clerk treasurer's team, to both the numbers with the Workman's Comp claims and total health costs, and with Workman's Comp, we actually have Hickok and Boardman as well provide some fairly. So these areas where we think there's some way for our policies and practices and protocols to impact the cost, there are a variety of attempts that go into proactively addressing them. If the council wanted to have a longer presentation on that or exploration of that at some point. I think it'd be something we could do. Yeah. Great. I'm going to share just one little anecdote, just since the council doesn't get to engage all the directors regularly. I just something that just the council's sort of aware of this, I think, great new resource we have in Deanna in the city. Deanna, in her interview process, she told me at one point that she has conducted more than 800 employee investigations over the course of her career, which is a key responsibility of HR. And for any time that you're involved in something like this, she had such great advice about I asked her how she approached that, and she said very simply immediately that the way to do it is to suspend judgment. You got to get deep into these things before you start to reach conclusions. I just thought that was very wise and showed a lot of judiciousness. So thank you, Deanna, and we will.
Is that a request to the council?
No. I just thought it was such wisdom that I thought the council might want to know it. But, no, there was no.
Lots of investigations.
I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. With that,
Subliminal.
that's right. Thank you, Deanna. Next up, we have Innovation and Technology Department. Brian Lowe, our CIO. Recently back from, does everyone know this? Recently back from paternity leave. His second son has joined the city team recently.
Doesn't do much yet, though.
Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, councilors. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. There's a short presentation I'll walk through, and then I'll leave plenty of time for questions for the budget here. So next slide, please, Rich. We've got a small, a lean team here in the Innovation and Technology Department, and the way the department works is we are often kind of working closely with other city departments and either augmenting or directing projects within those departments. So we kind of are additive to what the work is being done in many of these other different departments. And we're also responsible for the IT needs of the city. Next slide, please. There are four kind of main goal areas for us here. The kind of data and analysis within the city, the continuous improvement efforts, which are really efforts to improve existing city processes using new technology or more efficient means to improve outcomes, reduce costs, or find new revenues. We have obviously the IT responsibilities, and then this tech innovation element where we try hard in a community-facing way to support tech innovation in Burlington. We work with a number of other different partners, and the INT department has some direct engagement in that effort that I can discuss if people are interested. Next slide. And I got to say, it's a great team and a great job, and I think we had a really productive year. I wanted to call out three particular accomplishments from this past year where certain staff members I thought really distinguished themselves. Carolyn Felix, who's relatively new to the city team and has presented once to the council, led the equity report effort for our department and did a great job. Scott Duckworth, who's a long-serving city employee, like a very strong employee and our lead software engineer, helped with a website redesign that improved access to all kinds of different information on the city website, made it easier to pay for things, made it easier to get information when you needed it. And we've got some good feedback on that particular project. And then two other staff members, Antonio Guerrero and Pat Schmitz, worked on a number of different continuous improvement projects, some listed there and some beyond those, including permit reform. Next slide, please. And we're pretty excited about the next year. We have some interesting ideas and some places we think we could go. Importantly, in the context of this presentation, I wanted folks to know that we're assuming new costs, we're providing some new services, and we're doing that while we're decreasing modestly our draw on the FY20 budget. The kind of main objectives looking at FY20, we need to conclude the permit reform process, and we need to conclude the first round of the early learning scholarship process. We're going to conclude the second round of the capacity grants within early learning. There's a couple new fronts we could explore on the continuous improvement process. One that seems really promising at the moment, and we'll see how it goes looking out into FY20, is carbon credits, which are a new potential revenue source for the city that could support some of the tree planting effort that's been so successful in Burlington over the past year. It's changed year or two. There are other efforts as well that I can talk about if people are interested. We have to continue to modernize the city's technology platforms, and we have to continue to strengthen the city's IT security. I mean, it's it's a challenging environment, and I think there are many more things that we need to continue to do. And we also want to keep as a major priority for us BTV Stat, which is really it's a forum for information exchange amongst department heads and best practice exchange. It's also really where the kind of data and analytics come together in a way that allow us to make better judgments and better decisions as a city. Next slide. So significant changes from a budget perspective, not dramatic changes between FY19 and FY20 in this budget. Really the change that you see is a decrease in the operating budget. The reason we were able to decrease our operating budget, and you'll see it in our professional and consultant services line, is that we were able to bring in-house some consulting tasks that we thought we might need to go outside for, and we've made some improvements in how the security architecture in the city works, which reduces our need to carry some additional money that we think we might need for security. We have a better system in place now, and I want to credit my predecessor as well for putting us on that path before I took this role. That's Beth Anderson. And we've also been able to absorb some new costs, services that the city has here, Front Porch Forum, et cetera, certain new costs that weren't in the INT budget previously are now here. So that reduction is in spite of some increases that we've had to absorb. We also have a capital budget that we maintain for computer replacement and a permit reform reserve that I can talk about if folks are interested. Next slide, please. Sorry, Rich. Is it going? There we go. So the primary goals, I apologize, let's just say FY20 primary budget goals there. They really fall into 4 categories. I've highlighted 3 of those 4 on this slide. I think there are there's potential within BTV Stat to continue to focus on cross-departmental collaboration opportunities. Last year we had a real effort around equity measures, and we'll continue that in this coming year. Also looking at ways to benchmark city performance. We have a project underway now to give us a set of kind of comparable cities that we can use to help ourselves across different departments find legitimate benchmarks that help guide our efforts and our focus. The permit reform effort I've already talked about is kind of a major goal for our department this year. We'd like to enhance the city's public dashboard. I think there's some potential there to improve access to city data in ways that could be useful from, if you're a UVM data scientist, being able to kind of readily access large amounts of city data could be helpful to you in your research, as well as just a resident who wants to know what's happening in the city. We do have a public dashboard now. It provides a lot of good information, but we are underway on a project that I think could enhance that further. Next slide, please. Oh, don't worry, Rich. We're basically towards the end of this year. I wanted to make sure I called out that there is some of the fund balance has gone into this department as well. That's because we believe this is something that I think the council and mayor kind of directed in January. This money is coming into our budget in a way that I'm comfortable with. I think there's a number of potential one-time costs that we can put this toward, and projects that are meaningful, like a potential data center build between BED and the city that we're continuing to explore. And then the next slide, I wanted to make sure I called out for the council. There was no audit findings related to the INT department, but there was an audit recommendation about how we handle when someone leaves the city. And there wasn't a kind of standardized process to do that. And I know Councilor Busher had flagged this for me as well. We now have an automated daily report that comes into IT when somebody leaves the city, and we have a written procedure that we follow where we check with HR before we revoke access, because there are times where HR wants an account held open for a particular reason, but now we have this kind of automated system to make sure that we're controlling access to our network and limiting it to those that we want who are working for the city. Thanks, Rich. I just think here, in all likelihood, over the next couple of years, we're going to continue to have kind of security-related expenses protecting the IT network, and we really want to institutionalize a couple of the projects that we're working on now. Early learning, equity report, as I'm looking at kind of on that broader 2, 3, 4 year time horizon. I should stop there and take questions, if any. So, hey, Councilor.
I don't know if this is possible, but I'd like to see board docs explored as an
Alternatives to board docs.
It feels a little antiquated in the way it's in terms of the public. I think for us, once you get used to it, it's not that bad. But for them to be able to see when meetings are and the documents and the stuff. I mean, this is a long-term issue, but I'm not sure how popular board docs if it could be like on the city's website, basically like you can track how many people are tuned in to a meeting or a specific item, that'd be cool, in terms of clicks and things like that. But obviously, that's more complicated. That was one thing I had.
Oh, thank you.
All right, you got Councilor Tracy and then Councilor Busher and then President Wright.
Definitely agree with Councilor Polino on that. I think
Board Docs is interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just wondering.
That's good to hear.
Like, some of the changes you made to the website, I thought that was positive
Right.
and made some things more accessible. But I think that there may be opportunities to do some other things. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, if you had any changes planned for increasing, if you thought that there were ways that you could use the website better to get information out to the public. Like one idea for me, for instance, was like, is there an opportunity where like for instance, we have some folks who like to regularly attend the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee. Is there a way that we could have on the website where if someone wanted to follow a committee, they could sign up for a listserv where they would automatically get agendas and things like that? That's just an example, but are there other ways that you think we could leverage some technology to really engage the public better?
It's a good and timely question. There's actually, the city uses two kind of, they're in this kind of marketing platform genre, but it's actually, I think, directly applicable to what you're asking here. We use a system called GovDelivery and a system called MailChimp, and these systems are supposed to notify people of things that they sign up for and are interested in. We could look at, in particular, the GovDelivery piece, creating lists where people could sign up if they wanted TOOC updates. They could have an opportunity to sign up directly for TOOC updates, and not everything else, but just TOOC updates. GovDelivery in particular is structured that way, where that's a possibility. Because we already subscribe to it, we could look at, can we rejigger that such that it reflects kind of council committee structure. I think right now, currently, people sign up for a number of categories that have existed for maybe 8 years, and they tend to be like environment or, they're broader categories. So I'd be happy to look into that.
Well, I can follow up with you on that, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we had Councilor Busher, President Wright, and then Councilor Paul.
So this is, so we're all about access, and Brian has heard this before, but for me, I always tell people to go to the government calendar. And what it fails us, because not all departments use the government calendar, and actually there was a huge snafu just recently, and I didn't know you were back, or I would have been knocking on your door, that planning and zoning, all of their meetings weren't there. And the government calendar, at least if you went there, you would find out, and DPW didn't plug in to committee meetings, but if everybody plugged into that calendar, at least one place to go, and you could see all the meetings, and then at least for planning and zoning, there used to be, when you hit the agenda, it would link you to the agenda, and you'd get either, the public hearings and then the agenda, and you could get all of the information you wanted. I still find that incredibly convenient. The city council is on that calendar, but it does say that you need to go to board docs, which means that you have to do an extra step to go to board docs to get the information. You don't automatically link in. At least I haven't been able to do that. But so that's really one thing that I still think would be easy, or for people to say, what's happening in my city today, and just have every department use that calendar. I think it's a lot easier than trying to figure out having to go to planning and zoning, having to go to DPW, whatever. So that's my request still, and I know you know that, but I'm just saying it again.
Or we could just have them call you.
No, they're not going to call me. Thank you anyways, but yes.
And this is not, this is only a partial answer, but we had talked about it once before, and I was curious about how that government calendar worked. We only post meetings to the government calendar when they're formally warned, which means often the government calendar isn't updated until 24, 48 hours in advance of the meeting. And it's a tricky thing. We can't have a meeting on there that's not properly warned. It doesn't have an agenda, but it means that it's only on the calendar for a relatively short period of time before the meeting occurs. And so I think there's some additional thought about how to approach that too.
So just FYI, like planning and zoning, I'm going to use them. They have their schedule, and the DRB has their schedule out there, and then sometimes they don't have a quorum, so it says the meeting's canceled. So I'm just still in support of that. But I do have another statement. One is the security aspect of the system. I certainly applaud you for all the improvements. I mean, we had a scare with one department, as everyone knows, and that was a while ago when I think it was BED, as we know. But anyway, so I'm certainly glad that you're still focused on that. I'd like to know a little more about the carbon credit opportunities. I don't really know that at all. So thank you.
I'd be happy to talk about it either here or in, you know,
I'm sorry, I took his question. I
that's
didn't know
fine.
that.
And I'd be happy to talk
Do
about that
a
here or
brief-
later, maybe a different setting there, is that?
You can do a brief response on the carbon
Uh,
credit. I mean, it's a big topic, but.
Yeah, it's.
Can you just kind of quickly say what that's about?
I think it's exciting. There's the possibility that, in particular, the street trees that we're planting them in larger numbers, and they're attractive from an investor perspective in that universities like Duke University are trying to get to become kind of net zero institutions. They are buying street trees, and street trees sell better on these carbon exchange markets, and you can package them with other types of trees. And so Burlington is a known, well-known city nationally, and it's an attractive market for someone like Duke University. I mean, there's other people in these markets, obviously, but to kind of give you the short answer, there's new funding sources to support investment in street trees. And so we're trying to capitalize on that to support our ongoing operations and fund them in a way that, basically with new revenue that wouldn't come from Burlington taxpayers.
Wow.
So,
Thank you.
sure.
What kind of potential funding are you talking about there?
It's relatively low six-figure funding over a 2-year period, so not massive new funding, but not insignificant. And there's a ways to go. I mean, it's an FY20 goal, not an FY19 in the sense of, it could fall apart, but it's an interesting new kind of arena for us to explore, and I think it's where we should be. It fits kind of the mayor's objectives and his emphasis on the street trees in particular, and it allows us to bring new revenue into the city. So that's our.
So for me, your biggest highlight was permit reform. And can you just remind me where we are? What's the timeline for implementation of the first phase?
Yes, there's a couple different strands that need to kind of come together: the budget, the management transition, and the construction. And the construction is we're going to renovate 645 Pine Street, which is the home of DPW Parks and Code, and we're going to reestablish that as the home for permitting and inspections, merging those different departments together. That construction is slated to start mid-July and conclude end of September. So that's one timeline. The second is we need to come to you with an FY20 budget for the new permitting and inspections department, and so that happens next Tuesday night, where you'll see how these different components of departments or full departments are being merged together into a new entity. And the third piece is the kind of management transition. We're coming to you either late May or early June, my guess would be early June, with the job description changes that are reflected in truly what it really is most people's jobs are not changing at all, but for the reporting structure, but that does trigger the need to have a reevaluation of the job. So you'll see that in June, and the actual management transition would occur July 1 at the beginning of the fiscal year, where Bill Ward would become the director.
And this may be a question for Bill, but after all that, hopefully we had a commitment, from my recollection, that after that we would then have actual streamlining of a number of things in the permit process with some changes made.
It is definitely true, and the mayor's kind of been holding our feet to the fire a bit, and that he had us present at BTV Stat in February on what are those process changes going to look like. He had us look at a particular common type of permit that moves through that system. We have about a 20% success rate currently in getting this kind of typical permit through the system on the first time correctly, and we're going to aim to get that up to about 70% through a number of process changes. We're also looking at a number of other measures that we'll be able to report out on at BTV Stat at kind of regular intervals of are we really improving the system, and what other kind of changes can we make beyond the actual structural reform to make it easier for residents to secure permits.
At the end of this, that there'll be less hoops for citizens particularly to have to jump through.
That is definitely, yes, definitely the goal.
We should have Bill give a slide or two in his presentation next week that he has this developed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the council is going to be pleased by how, even in advance of this being created, Bill already has the teams working together and has identified some, hard empirical goals for improvement.
Good, great, thank you.
I lost track. Did Councilor Paul?
I
No.
was next, but my questions have been answered, have been asked.
Okay.
Answered, so I'll pass.
Everyone else had their chance? Great. Any last thoughts, Brian?
No.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, I guess that brings it to the mayor's office. Always an exciting budget.
No, there's no written material, there's no slide, Mr. Mayor.
That's how exciting it is.
What you see is what you get.
Right there.
There's really no, we're saving a little bit of money in the mayor's office because we have new incumbents in the roles, so that's why you see a small savings year over year. Few departments actually see their total costs in absolute dollars go down, and there's really not. If people have questions about how the budget is structured, I'd be happy to ask them, but there's really nothing, literally nothing new. Great. With that.
Well, you said it was exciting.
With that, we will go to the Burlington Police Department. Chief Del Pozo is here, as well as our new Chevalier.
Yeah, you said it right.
Knight, Lise Verno.
I didn't even wear it today. Everybody at the
Everyone knows
station-
I'm not joking about that. Everyone knows.
Yes.
Lise was knighted by the French government, and since she
knighted?
last
Yes.
appeared before you.
What does that mean?
When we did the flag event, raising the international francophone flag, and the consul general to France in Boston came and pinned it on me. And
You're now a knight.
yes, I am now a knight.
She's very bossy now.
Everybody at the station says, "Where's
Do we
your
have to
sword?"
refer to you in any particular way?
Madame Chevalier, as the mayor.
We're still working
probably
it out
did.
between the chief and the knight. So, depends on what relative mood we're in. All right,
It's been quite an honor recognizing her long service to the sister city
Absolutely.
effort. So,
Congratulations.
that's Chief. Welcome.
thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, Brandon Del Pozo, the Chief of Police. This is our FY20 budget presentation. I was told I had many fewer minutes than I thought, so I'll speak quickly. But you'll see similar trends between the format this year and format in prior years. We'll do an overview, talk about trends in crime, progress and challenges, the budget, history, goals, challenges, and changes, and questions and discussion. These slides were prepared before the last city council meeting. I know that some of the challenges that we've taken up recently might not be directly reflected in this presentation. Some of them are mentioned, but you may think too glancingly, but fair enough. If you have questions in the discussion section, we can cover them then. We are authorized strength of 105 officers with 140 total staff. Whereas officer-wise, we're in the high 90s right now. We get, if you're counting phone calls, 300,000 phone calls or inquiries annually. That boils down to 30,000 calls for service, 4,000 criminal investigations, about 1,500 arrests, 1,900 to 2,000 traffic incidents, and we're also the emergency communications center for police, fire, and EMS for the city. People, as I've said every year, are not only the most important part of our success, getting the best people doing the right things consistently, but they're also the most expensive. Salary and benefits continue to dominate, like many operations, continue to dominate our budget. And so changes in the contract and changes in compensation and benefits greatly affect our budget. They're the number one driver of changes. This is our organizational chart. It should say like night in there somewhere. We'll fix that. But, again, this really hasn't changed much. I know we've just introduced an opioid policy coordinator, but none of this is new from this year versus last year. I used to say it was the most complex job in government. People took umbrage to that, so I made it a complex job, but now I'm thinking of putting the most complicated job in government back up there. It's the frontline response for our nation's opioid epidemic here in the city. We intervene in persistent and acute mental health crises. I know you had a visit earlier from a person who's probably one of our number one mental health crisis recipients in the city. That man, just by way of example, has had 9 interactions with the police in the last 30 hours. So we deal a lot with mental health crises. We safely administer the state's largest civic events. You have the marathon coming up, the 3rd of July. We do that, in a climate of
vehicle and pedestrian attacks. I know you might say what are the chances of it happening here? The chances of it happening here are extremely small, but nonetheless, we're the people whose job it is to take that seriously. Deputy Chief Murad was at the explosion at the Boston Marathon himself when it happened, and I know it leaves a lasting effect on our fiduciary responsibility towards this city. We manage the homeless and quality of life issues in the city's commerce and civic centers. We police an international airport. We protect our schools, keep the city in motion, fight and reduce all forms of crime and disorder. And what's the most important part of all of this is in the context of doing it fairly and equitably in accordance with Vermont and the city's values. This is what we do to serve the community. We have an annual barbecue. We have an annual community academy, regular clergy luncheons. We're having one next week. Outreach via community affairs liaisons and officers. Downtown foot patrols. There's 2 cops on patrol right now. We had a foot patrol on North Street today as well. Now that it's warmer, we're doing more of that, and we've aligned our staff accordingly. We have school resource officers, youth outreach programming, training, mentoring, education, and awareness.
Can we just pause on that? This is important. Just want to make sure the council, we have not had the capacity until the increase in the headcount to have consistent foot patrols in City Hall Park.
Right, and even then, it's on the margin, but that's that marginal difference is the opportunity to do community policing consistently versus ad hoc. This was just going to be a marker between the sections, but that, I think it's worth dwelling for a minute. That is on the roll call wall that cops turn out. When cops turn out for duty every day, they see that. It's what they see every day on the wall to their right when they do roll call. And I just want to focus your attention because you might be thinking, why are you thinking of people as your opponent and why are you quoting a general? I put this up right after I got here, maybe within a few months, because I wanted cops to think, it's not just like people who are skeptics of the police or people who don't like the police or people who believe it should almost all be social work who think you should do this without using force whenever possible. That even like the person who's considered the greatest general of all history, the person who was not a social worker and not involved in 21st century policing, but who was like winning wars in China 2,500 years ago and whose wisdom made it down through the centuries, even that general believes that the highest skill is to accomplish your goals without fighting. And I just think it's like that is the ethos on our wall. And do we always succeed in meeting it? No. I mean, that's what's a focus right now today, but that's still our driving ethos. All incidents are trending downward. We've had about 7,000 fewer incidents from 2016 to now. It manifests in a few ways. We'll talk about some of them. Unfortunately, aggravated assault is trending up. It's not this huge, statistically significant thing, but we're going back to our 2015 number. It might take another year to figure out if that's a real upward trend, but that's a serious crime of assault that we should definitely keep an eye on. A lot of that is bar violence related. Some of it is domestic. Property offenses are going down. I have to be careful. Some of them are definitely going down because of a decrease in that type of crime. Some of it is because we've changed our trespass administration so that stores can administer their own trespass notices, and we won't. What that means is that they used to have to call us for a shoplifter, and then they would get us to administer the trespass. Instead, now they do it themselves. So a lot of times they won't bother to call us for the shoplifter. They'll just trespass the shoplifter. So I'm just being candid that some of that, like car breaks and stuff, are legitimate reductions in crime, but I don't think that shoplifting is down as much as we would like to take credit for. And this is, I think petty larceny from a motor vehicle is something that people consistently do or don't report at the same rate. That's down significantly. I think that's a success. Unlawful mischief, I think, is a real success. That's vandalism. Retail theft, the mayor, I wish I could take credit for this, mayor. I just don't think it's down that much. I think people are just issuing their own trespass summonses and notices and sending shoplifters on their way. Larceny from a building, I think that is close to a genuine reduction. And burglary being down is actually quite a genuine reduction. We've shifted a lot of our emphasis to burglary reduction in the last year, assigning detectives and making good cases, and that's keeping people's homes and businesses safe when they're not there. Quickly, these are the things that are up. Again, aggravated disorderly conduct, that's not noise. Aggravated disorderly conduct is like drunken fighting. Unlawful mischief, unlawful trespass. Assaults on police officers are up. That's a small N. It's up by 16%. We want to see over time if that persists. And cocaine possession's up. that is actually, there's something to that. We're hearing that there's more cocaine coming into town now, as stimulants are riding in on the back of heroin. We're seeing that in a few cities in the Northeast, and we're hearing that as well from Safe Recovery, that we are seeing more cocaine coming into our city of late. Race data, again, not to give it short shrift, but I'm sure we'll have the opportunity for a much longer and more mindful discussion about race disparities in everything from car stops to use of force to arraignments. But this just shows that, like, in 2015, when I got here, Professor Seguino pointed me towards the DOJ reports that showed that the fruitfulness of searches, how well you develop suspicion to do a search across races, is or isn't an indicator of bias, right? If you're ascribing unfounded suspicion to people of color just because you're suspicious of them and they haven't done anything or as much wrong, it's less likely for your searches to actually be fruitful, right? If you're ascribing an equal amount of suspicion to everybody, it's founded in the facts, not in bias, then your results are likely to be about the same. So we really concentrated on good drug interdiction training and that type of education in 2016 onward, and you see that our hit rates, so to speak, the fruitfulness of our searches converged, and there's parity. In some years, we actually have more effective searches against black drivers than whites, which means our suspicion is even more founded in fact. The one thing I will say as a caveat, and it's really worth talking about, is that so much of our car searches are based on suspicions about marijuana that just don't exist anymore. So a lot of this data was up until legalization, July of 2018. We used to average 3 to 4 searches a month in Burlington total of all races, 3 to 4 a month. Since marijuana has been legalized, we're averaging 1 a month. We've only had 2 marijuana-related searches, period, in the whole city, which were cars, since legalization. One was underage possession of marijuana, which is still a driver underage, he confessed. And the other one is suspicion that the marijuana is being consumed while driving. Other than that, we haven't had marijuana-related searches since legalization. So that should really affect our search rates in the coming months and years. Progress and challenges. Victories, I guess, nothing is a total victory, but we began housing the Chittenden County Opioid Alliance in the last 18 months. Our emergency response vehicle and negotiators safely resolved many legitimate crisis incidents with armed people. We are statewide leaders and trainers for conflict de-escalation. Some of you heard that on Monday. We are now instructors in that. Our burglaries, I said 38%. We've audited our crime numbers, so we thought it was 42%. It's actually 38%. Crashes with injuries in the city are down 18%. And Chittenden County saw a 50% decline in opioid deaths.
Crashes and injuries down, a high percentage of that is due to the North Avenue change.
Right, so a lot, right. It's worth saying, Mayor, that like they're down overall in the city. There's no place where they're up, but a lot of that decrease is driven in the North Avenue pilot. Yes. So focus on de-escalation. We've just trained 3 new crisis negotiators, bringing our total to 20. So that's about 1 in 5 of our employees is a qualified crisis negotiator. We have 9 instructors in the Police Executive Research Forum's de-escalation training curriculum. So we can conduct that training whenever we need to in-house. That's this county-wide initiative. We're continuously developing the capacity of the emergency response vehicle. And to say, a lot of the focus around de-escalation is about people in mental health crises and barricaded people and people who don't want to be extracted from a car to be arrested or something. And we're seeing now also, concerns about just de-escalation in like very routine but fast developing street situations too, right? So that emergency response vehicle is not going to be the thing that like stops a street fight from getting out of hand or brings people into voluntary compliance. But ICAT actually can be shifted towards that capacity. So I don't mean to say that truck is going to address the incidents we were concerned about in front of the bars from September. But it is our commitment to, when we identify a problem or an issue, we move to meet it. In some cases with equipment, I don't feel that the challenges specifically before us here at the bars are about equipment. They're about different types of engagement and training, use of verbal skills. Opioid epidemic, CompStat continues to expand with national partners and international experts. Substat, which is a focus just on victims who are likely to overdose, the at-risk community. That's a collaboration countywide that really looks at solutions for our most at-risk people. Family Stat is connecting the highest risk families with services. It's a collaboration with DCF. We had a very notable opioid town hall in March 2019. Many of you were there. We are arrest addiction screening. We are screening arrestees for addiction. That program has been modest so far. I know we're working with the mayor to expand looking for ways to expand its scope and its reach. A lot of times I think we're not reaching people who we could be screening at night. It's kind of almost like a business hours operation now, and so we'll be analyzing that. We've advocated for legislative change by, for example, trying to decriminalize certain medication-assisted treatment drugs. We facilitated state law enforcement training. We're trying to, again, have a say in how the training takes shape at the academy. We've been, I'm sorry, this is opioids, so different. What we're trying to do is we've invited people from the entire state to try to destigmatize medication-assisted treatment and destigmatize addiction, and we've given psychiatric training and addiction research training not only to our entire police department, but to the entire county and even prosecutors and people from outside the county. And finally, distributed fentanyl test strips. That is a statistically significant change. That is just the raw numbers. When you look at the population, the death rate, population adjusted, because we recognize we're a population center, that reduction in fatalities is even more marked and more statistically significant. That's not a guarantee that it will stay the same or we'll keep it. We're on track to kind of meet last year's numbers, but that is still worlds away from the rest of our state. Fortunately for us, but maybe also we can take part in leading the state towards a better outcome. These are our challenges, right? We still have drug dealers, weapons, and sex traffickers targeting individuals suffering from substance use disorder and high-risk individuals. We have trafficking. We have people. We don't synthesize fentanyl here, and we don't grow poppies. So the drugs that are affecting us are coming in from out of state, and we're just trying as best we can to address that in a way that doesn't have unacceptable collateral consequences for people suffering from addiction. We also just don't want to. We cannot arrest our way out of this, but we do have to deal with this threat. Homelessness and its associated issues, including encampments, are still quite a problem. Just a good, equitable way to deal with them, especially on public land that has a lot of contested uses. Mental health resources, again, it was apropos that we had one of our premier service users come in, but there are people that have mental health issues that have had over 1,000 contacts with the police department, and our officers see them as a real externality, meaning the officers, it's imposed on them. They have someone who needs help, who gets sent for help, may get it, is right back out, and the officers sometimes are dealing with them 2, 3, 4 times a day. That does wear them down, and we're hoping for longer term answers. Budget restrictions of partner agencies that curtail opportunities for collaboration. Like, we do have the biggest budget for municipal policing in the state. Vermont State Police is the only bigger one. So we kind of have the opportunity to stage a lot of training and a lot of scenarios and a lot of drills and a lot of collaboration. Sometimes we find that, like, neighboring agencies, not only do they not have the resources to partner with us sometimes, but they literally have to, like, stop policing their streets to train with us. So it's just a challenge, because we do want a consistent type of response across our borders, since we're not far from any of our borders. Winooski, Colchester, South Burlington are constantly working in coordination with us. And recruitment is always a challenge in American policing now, everywhere, and here too. I think we've done a great job. I'm not just saying that to be superlative, but nonetheless, it's a challenge. For example, this is our most recent hiring class. We had a foreign-born permanent resident Sri Lankan, foreign-born Vietnamese, male white, male Hispanic, female white, female Hispanic, Latin-born. So a good class. The Sri Lankan gentleman to the right just decided Vermont wasn't for him after about a week and left. So now we're down to 5. But that's a good hiring class. We want to be able to perpetuate something like that. But we have a very rigorous process. It takes 6 to 9 months. You have to live at the academy 5 days a week for 16 weeks. Then you go through field training. Staffing, when we froze this at a moment in time, was at 101 officers. We're now at like 97 or 98. It's trended up over time. Don't gasp. It's the bottom one, the lowest one, is still like 90, 94 or 93. It's not like we've, this hasn't been a huge swing. We're talking about a swing of like a dozen officers, maybe less. We had a lot of departures last year, a lot of retirements and changes. Some people saying, Vermont's not for me. This is not in any order of aspersion or anything. Vermont's not for me. Burlington's not for me. The Burlington Police Department's not for me. Chief Del Pozo's not for me. You name it. We've had, or just retirement is for me. I've done my time. I want my pension. We've had 16 people leave, but but we've done a good job of. So these are service retirements,
It's the majority.
which is the majority of what they were in 2017 and 2018. And these are other departures. So again, like folks who were either terminated or resigned in lieu of termination. We had 3 of those in the last 3 years. People who just said, like, this is not the right fit for me. I didn't think the private sector's better. I feel more comfortable being a police officer in Maryland. Milton's going to give me a huge hiring bonus. It's nothing against you guys, but that's where the Milton guy, for example, like he was from Milton. The Essex guy wanted to be closer to his wife. I'm showing you, let's distinguish that from the right column, which is people just saying either medical retirements or opportunities are better elsewhere. One person went to work for state government, one for the FBI, one for the New York State Police, 2 to the Vermont State Police, 1 to Dover, New Hampshire, I think to find love, 1 for UVM, got a big signing bonus, and 1 for Homeland Security. So it's just interesting. I mean, that's where our folks are going when they're not retiring with the pension. But again, we have recruited enough to keep that number in the high 90s. So let me get to budget. I think we'll be done. Done with the presentation. So revenue increases. What we did was, instead of going through this very, 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 very tedious alarm billing process for false alarms that we got like medium compliance with, we just said, let's just charge more for the fee and offset that and just counsel people to do better jobs with their alarms rather than constantly fine them. And what that was a net increase in our revenue for that, or?
No, it pretty much was neutral. We were
Neutral.
hoping it would be neutral, not a loss because of the false alarms, but people are managing, they're appreciating that. So we're seeing a net zero, which is good because we are not doing the system malfunctions, so.
Right, so the alarm
And
license.
that was the goal. The goal was to try to make it a better process, better for the customer, not worse for the customer, but not worse for us either. So I think we were successful with that.
Right, so that's revenue neutral, and we're not constantly billing people for false alarms, but we do reach out to them when they have a false alarm and just counsel them. And I think, how much was the fee before we go on? It was like,
It was
no, the false alarm fee.
Oh, it was 100 to,
Yeah, people just thought that was pretty
Yeah. Each time.
onerous, yeah,
each
so.
time build up, yeah.
I thought that was a good balance. Also, technology improvements, so online payment of parking tickets, benefit to the customers, no charge to the city, has some curious downstream revenue consequences. It's a good thing. I mean, people find it very, very, very easy to pay their parking tickets online now, so what we get are fewer late fees. But I don't think a city should structure its revenue based on like making it hard for people to pay something and then charging them a late fee.
We wouldn't collect taxes if that were the case.
Right. So it's a success in that sense. It just did have a revenue effect. So the FY20 budget will support, when I say continued expansion of the size of the department to 105, to be candid, we have an attrition number built in there, assuming that since we're in the mid to high 90s, we won't actually reach 105. So the city took some money out of that pot, so to speak. But we do want to have the ability to get slightly above 100 if we can, like maybe to 102. If we need to go to 105, I know we can talk about that at the right time. We're going to also use this budget to continue to respond to the
But
opioid.
May I just say
Yes,
something?
yes,
So
you can.
because we are at 105, because we are funded and our goal is 105, when we have all those vacancies that you saw on the other pages, it allows us to be at a higher level, to go down to a more acceptable level, to hopefully someday still be able to hit 105. But the average may be between 100 and 105. We're a little bit further down than that, but because we have the ability to go to 105, we are expecting, like you hit the 101. Well, we hit 101 more than once, so we want to be able to do that consistently. That is the goal.
Developing an emergency response capacity, so that's enhanced training in the use of non-lethal force and de-escalation techniques. And again, listen, to be candid, this was submitted before our more recent conversations. That's always been a priority. And training for the emergency response vehicle. Cops feel like they feel reassured that the idea that de-escalation is not only a verbal process and a negotiating process, but it's also about controlling a situation so that it's contained in a safe way where they can employ negotiation. I think that's one of the things that folks lose sight of, that we get called to situations by nature that are on the verge of being out of control. And so it's not only the verbal work that de-escalates, it's physically controlling a situation so we can safely use our negotiation skills. The changes, again, reduced 40/40 motor vehicle fines from traffic enforcement. We are stopping fewer cars than ever before. It has not had a big negative effect on the overall accident rate. There's only like a 2 or 3% change, but we get less money from that. Again, I do always have felt that a city should not assume that, law enforcement and fines should be a source of revenue. If we can achieve traffic safety without revenue from fines, I consider that a success. Parking revenue from tickets will continue to decrease as online payments for meters is utilized. The easier you can pay a meter, the less we'll be writing tickets. And the quicker you can pay it, the fewer late fees we'll collect. That's a success, right? Yeah, okay. We agree. I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm just speaking for my gut. The increase in revenue will be seen by DPW meter revenue, FYI. So that doesn't benefit the police department. Little reminder. Our budget challenges. So we have, overtime continues to be a thing. And so the more officers you have, ironically, you're paying more in straight time and paying a little less in overtime. Some of it, just overtime continues to be a little north of $500,000. I think that's higher than in past. Is this a reduction in the amount of overtime? I'm just trying to know where we're at. No, it's not. That's right. No. Yeah, no. Thank you.
Beth tried to help.
No, it allows us flexibility. I mean, we can get into this if you have questions, but staffing the airport is like it's a really arcane staffing that's required by the Federal Aviation Administration at odd hours that we can't fill it. We have to take officers off patrol and send them there. We have to backfill patrol with overtime. Court is a source of overtime. We get subpoenas to court. We honor the subpoenas, but an officer often has to come in on his or her day off. And then we have things like civic events like the tree lighting, or I think the marathon is paid for by the Vermont City Marathon, but a lot of our civic events are staffed with overtime assignments. Recruitment and retention is always a concern. And the union contract, the officers got a well-negotiated raise, and that will continue to raise the price of running a police department. Looking forward to 21-21. The principal goal, again, I still would like to make sure we're well-staffed. In a recruiting climate across the country now, I just want to make sure we have the right men and women to do the job and enough of them. And it's important that we continue to police in alignment with the city's values. So community policing, properly trained supervisors, training and specialization in high-need areas like crisis response, policy analysis, mental health, domestic violence, et cetera. Again, de-escalation and, where racial inequalities manifest acutely, it is in America's criminal justice system, and we're at the front of that pipeline. So that's something that we'll always be contending with. And about this dog, so we've gotten requests. This dog is 2.5 years old. We bought him. I'm sorry. This dog was born 2.5 years ago, and the dog was named Bully when he was born to a private breeder 2.5 years ago. When the breeder was looking to part with the dog, he was willing to donate this dog to the Burlington Police Department. We did not look a dog in the mouth, a gift dog in the mouth. We took the dog. I understand, I did not procure this dog personally, but when I found out his name was Bully, I asked the same questions a lot of people ask, like how will that resonate with school children who were bullied? How will that resonate with police, people who wonder if they can trust the police? So I changed the dog's name to Billy. So this dog was born with a name. We got it as a donation. Dogs have rights, but so do we. So we changed this dog's name to Billy, and I think that the feedback we were getting from the community was actually good feedback. It was a dog that cost us nothing, but its name would cost us something in terms of people's questioning our motives. So I'd like to thank the people who brought that up, because it empowered me to tell my cops, listen, this is a real issue. So we have a renamed dog. Thank you.
Great. Questions? Good.
Chief, what do you, on the increases, the trends, changes in crime,
Right.
the increases in aggravated disorderly conduct, unlawful mischief, unlawful trespass, any indications as to why we see those trends going up? Is it people coming out of bars, as a citizen suggested the other night, not controlling those people in the bars? Is it more aggressive people on the streets?
I think there's something to say. The aggravated disorderly conduct charge, again, we've retooled how we deal with, speech as disorderly conduct, because there's a very high threshold. Our officers knew the law, but not the case law. Aggravated disorderly conduct is more about fighting, and sometimes what you have is people fighting, but then when you break it up, they don't want to press charges because it's like this mutual affray between like drunken fraternity brothers or people fighting over, for argument's sake, like a romantic quarrel. And then when the cops come, we're like, we can't just let this fight go on in the street, but we break it up, and they're like, nah, I don't want to. It's between us. So the charge, instead of being assault, then becomes disorderly conduct. There is that type of increase. As far as the increase in felony mischief, I would have to look into exactly what's driving that, but that is graffiti that reaches a certain threshold, certain types of property damage. I think that is substantial. Trespass, it's an increase of 9 incidents. I'd want to see that over time to make sure it's statistically significant. And I'm not just going to, from the gut, jump at assault on a police officer, go, look, it's up, it's Armageddon. No, I want to see, it is 6 more incidents. I want to see if that persists over time. I don't know if that's significant.
And are we seeing, I know it's mentioned it here, but are we seeing more people coming into Burlington? We keep seeing reports of people from New York, Boston, Connecticut, whatever, coming here and dealing drugs. And, that was what, obviously, the killing, the shooting on North Willard was about a few weeks ago.
Right. Yeah, those people, Benzel Hampton had been here for a little while, but the people who came to kill him, half of them flew in from Orlando for that purpose. So it's not like it's increasing or here's the thing, like I said, and we're not a major distribution hub for drugs like New York or Boston or to some extent Springfield, Massachusetts, or, Philly or Baltimore. And we also do not manufacture or synthesize these drugs here, so they've got to come from somewhere. And it's a natural black market supply chain. So to think that we're being invaded somehow by predators is not entirely right. We're just it is what the black market is. And the black market is going to be either Vermonters heading south a bit and meeting people, or people coming up north to meet Vermonters. But there are people from elsewhere. Either we got to go get the drugs from folks out of state, or they've got to bring them here. We got to meet them halfway. And so when we were looking at, for example, a drug interdiction today, we saw drug crews talking to the narcotics folks from Michigan. Not in order of prevalence, but from Michigan, from Philadelphia, from New York, and from Boston and Springfield. That's just how drugs get here. I'm not trying to trivialize it. There's no we're not in anyone's crosshairs. It's just the black market behaving like the black market, and it is with an out-of-state origin.
So one is just a technical question. I'm not quite sure. It's under parking fines.
Right.
And it's over $1 million. And I wasn't clear based on what you said, and I wasn't clear how that correlated with the fact that there would be less fines and.
So the account that you want to look at is the 4040 account. That's the one account that we're talking about. That's
Okay, but what's 4050 then? What one is that?
That's everything else.
That's everything else, okay. So, which is like what?
So when we report that being down, we're reporting that one account being down, not.
It's not the,
whole.
Okay, other parking fines are,
Yes.
okay, thank you, all right. So, just one comment before I ask you something that's more serious, but I thought you were gonna tell me that Bully actually wasn't aggressive at all and wasn't the
Billy.
right dog. I
Billy.
understand, but Bully's name, I thought that maybe that's what you were gonna say. But what do you use a police dog for? To subdue someone?
No,
Really?
so there's two principal purposes. And by the way, so I asked why he was named Bully, and that he was originally born in the Czech Republic.
Oh.
But apparently, I don't know, there's apocryphal stories to this dog's name. Either that's just the name that Czech breeders gave him, or they said Gino, the officer there, Gene Bacalini, said that when he was a puppy, he would always whine and push the other puppies till he got his way. So
I see, that's, okay.
but what it's used for is two things. One much more so than the other. One is to sniff for drugs, sniff for contraband.
Who's trained to
and it's trained to do
Yeah.
so. It's
Right,
not
right,
it's not based on a hunch.
Yes, I understand that.
And the other one, and the other thing, it's about twice a year, or maybe I think I was talking to Wade Lebrecq, who runs the canine program. I think the record is 3 times a year. A dog will bite someone. When I say bite, they're trained not to punch the skin, and by the arm and bring them out of a confined space. So someone's running away, and they'll. We had somebody who we arrested for, and a lot of times people just see the dog and comply. So we had somebody who was holed up in a porta potty as we were ending a foot pursuit, and the person was being sought for burglary and rape. And instead of, once he knew that the dog was out there and that we would use the dog to extract him, he just surrendered. But those are the two principal uses. And kids like playing fetch with the dog.
Well, anyways, thank you. So the more serious thing is, you mentioned the need, well, part of the discussion Monday night was talking about trying to de-escalate and using individuals, counselors, social workers, the on-street people, the program that you have. So I was trying to figure out how we accomplish that, because when you need it, when you need to de-escalate, you need to do it right then and there.
Right.
And so if you don't have somebody there at that moment, there is some lag time, and I don't know whether you have people on call that
Right.
help to de-escalate, and what that time is between the time you call someone and when you can expect them to arrive. That's a question. Do you have someone on call, and what's the interval, usual interval? The second thing is, it does suggest, as has been stated more by the community and also resonating for all of us, the need to give that skill set as much as possible to the police officer.
So I think there's two or three distinctions to make or points to make, and that's a great question. Because I think even cops, there's something, one of the criticisms of the term community policing is that, like, people throw it out as a salve and never really define it. Like, we could sit around, I could ask what community policing is, and we'd get, like, as many different ideas as there are people. I think de-escalation sort of falls into that as well. It's this thing that America seizes on when it sees that it wants more of its police, and it says, there's an issue with violence, let's de-escalate. It does take a lot of different forms, right? So one of the ways we think of de-escalation is when there's somebody who could be potentially violent, but they're holed up, or they're, they have a knife to themselves, or they're saying, I'm not coming out of here, you got to get me, or they're saying, I'm going to try to get a cop to kill me, or I know I'm going away for a serious crime, so the only way you're getting me is, like, by coming in, with force. In those situations, right, like what the ERV does, for example, is, like, actually contains them in that area, if we can do so safely, and it allows time for our crisis negotiators to come in. So we have our crisis negotiators, but we also have folks like street outreach, right, if it's a mental health person, and we can get them. When we're talking about, like, the other scenario, let's say there's people who just are about to break into a fight, right? You have seconds to act. You're not going to, like, wall them off and surround them, but at that point, it has to be an officer's decision sometimes to at least issue verbal command. Like, de-escalation could be, if you don't stop doing this right now, I'm taking you to jail, because you're showing somebody what the consequences are and that you intend to fulfill them, and they have time to process that, and maybe they say, like, all right, like, I'm not going to get involved. That's an issue of judgment. Other times it could be, why are you guys fighting? This isn't a big deal. Let's take it someplace else, right? Or I'm sure if you give each other 5 minutes, you'll realize you're doing something foolish. So there's that type. And then also, like, sometimes just team-based skills can help in de-escalation. Instead of having one officer confronting 3 people as a fight is brewing, or 2 or 4, you might have 4 or 5 officers. And that seems like, it's might seem intimidating, but the crowd might say, wow, there's enough officers here that if we start going at it, they're going to be able to take this fight apart pretty quickly. But 1 or 2 of those officers might be able to speak in a way that'll resonate with the crowd and get them to stop. Like, if you look at de-escalation training and procedures, it's not only individual-based, it's team-based. And it's also, like, it's pretty fluid. Like, I'm going to tell you, there are times where there's a fight going on Church Street, and there's just no de-escalation to be had. It's literally, like, prying people apart. But when you look at, like, what's troubling the public in these recent incidents, it's officers, like, not even giving the opportunity for someone to comply with a verbal command, right? And in one case, an officer might have articulated, this guy's, we've criminally charged him 60 times. He spits at us and fights at us every time I speak to him. He's in the middle of a fight, so I'm just going to grab him by the arms right now. Like, that is not an illegitimate response, but it can't just be, like, something you thought of after the fact to justify what you've done. You have to actually believe that you didn't have an opportunity to issue a verbal command. And I think almost all the time, unless it's like an active fight with fists raining, you do have the time to issue a verbal command. So, and that might seem like a minor thing, but to answer your question, Councilor Berkshire, you don't need like hours and hours and hours of social work training to at least like try to talk to someone in a way that gives them an opportunity to understand and comply. Does that make sense?
And I understand that. My question, though, is also, and thank you, you answered most of it, but if indeed you were to want to call somebody
Right.
in, do you have people on call? And what would the anticipated time be for someone to arrive? I mean, sometimes there have been situations in the past, I'm not talking about
Yeah.
recent, where there has been an individual that has had a mental health issue or whatever. And so if you need assistance, because
I understand.
all your skills, is there someone on call, first of all, in that capacity, either a social worker or a crisis center person? And what is the anticipated response time? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out too.
So 1 in 5 of our officers is a crisis negotiator, which has a mental health component. And it's not, you don't have a degree in social work, but you're able to de-escalate. You're able to at least engage people in like crisis mitigation. That 1 in 5 having that means that we'll almost always have somebody working or somebody close by that we can get there quickly. We do have street outreach, but I know Councilor Paulino is a big advocate of it, and I think I support it. They have shrunk their coverage and their hours. So like during the day, during the week, street outreach is not far, and they know most of the people who are apt to be in crisis, or at least have a good rapport with people. It would be good to be able to expand that. Beyond that, we'd have to call a crisis negotiator in or have one on hand, and it would involve literally figuring out who the person is, seeing if they have a healthcare provider, and if they don't, I would call Howard Center Crisis just to see if they'd have resources. But that's sort of ad hoc.
So I'm interested to not suggest solutions necessarily, but to say if indeed it would seem appropriate to have a system where someone was on call on the hours that you usually don't have someone from outreach or whatever. I think that would be something that I would entertain. I don't know what that would cost, but I think that's an important thing that might be backup for all of you and backup for the community. So that's why I asked the question.
No, thank you. And it dovetails with some of the requests that we just enhance our capacity for social work or our interface with social work, and that does make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Councilor Roof. Oh, you had. I'm sorry, I missed that. Go ahead, Councilor Trish.
Okay, first question is about, I saw a metric a while ago rating our LGBT friendliness as a city, and
Right.
we were specifically, we were above we were ranked well, but not where I feel like we need to be. And one of the areas where we were specifically recognized as not really kind of meeting their criteria was having an LGBT resource officer within the police department.
Right.
Can I speak to that, Chief, just real quick? It was, yeah.
And how, if we're able to address that in any way?
Did you want to say?
Yeah, basically, my understanding of what happened there is Human Rights Watch puts out this this rating. Human Rights Campaign, of course, puts out this annual scorecard. They mail to cities their kind of perspective score to let them know where they're headed and give cities a chance to respond. That came to the mayor's office during the time that we were going through some transition in the mayor's office, and as a result, we were a little bit slow in correcting the fact that there is a liaison for both the mayor's office and the police department. So we got docked a substantial number of points, basically just because we didn't have that, because we didn't respond to that mailing. That's now been addressed, and we have. I went to the Pride Center and had a great meeting and just made sure everyone's on the same page about what liaison resources exist. So I'm confident that's been addressed, and we'll get a higher score in this upcoming cycle.
I think it's also about meeting that commitment on the ground too. I mean, it's a very small thing, but we made a point of making all of our restrooms, for example, ungendered and unisex. But we have people who are, like our domestic violence liaison, makes no bones about being a member of the LGBTQ community. She's outspoken in that regard. We have officers, I think, that are ready to fill that role. And there's two things, right? There's officers who, as Americans still might have a stigma or not know how to engage people properly, and that's another issue. We did gender identity training. It was 2 years ago, but we invited the LGBTQ community in to do gender identity training. But beyond that, if it's important for us to have a specific liaison, I'm sure that we could find somebody who would take that on, not only as a matter of, as a matter of filling the position, but as a matter of lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. I mean, I just feel like we've seen so much across the street cases where there have been bad interactions with police. I mean, the reason that we have a lot of the rights we have is because of the police riot, basically. So,
Right.
So I just think that we need to really pay attention to that and keep that involved.
No, thank you.
The other question I have is with regards to the staffing levels. That's come into sort of stark relief in the last week and a half, with calls to cap staffing levels and shift towards more social service related positions. And I feel like that, at least as I see some of the trends that you're talking about with regards to mental health and
Right.
and that those kinds of things, that feels like that has some value to me. So I'm wondering your thoughts about trying to transition some of that force towards social service to deal with some of this stuff that it doesn't feel like police officers are really equipped to deal with as well as potentially a social service
Right.
provider who's been specifically trained in that particular area of supporting.
So as you could see, we did hire a social worker for the opioid crisis, right? And so our commitment, our openness to that is real. In fact, when we talked about destigmatizing addiction and dealing with those crises, we put literally our money where our mouth was and hired a social worker. And to legitimize her position, we took the conference room that Lisa used to eat her lunch in and turned it into an office. So she's sitting right there in the command staff to show this is a real thing. She's not exiled in some side room. George Kelling is a criminologist who died yesterday in Hanover. He gained either fame or is notorious for developing the idea of broken windows. But one of the other things that he talked about, which is often cast by the wayside, is this idea that police and social workers should go out on patrol together. That's sort of the street outreach model, but they should turn out of the same place and attack the same problems together and bring their collective approach to dealing with things like homelessness and mental health. I'm not opposed to that idea at all. I will say money-wise, however, that, and you may not, let's say you may not want to hear this, but like I feel that we, even now, even with 105, have an understaffed police department. And you could say I only feel that because as a chief, I just want as many cops as possible. But if you take away the airport staffing, that's 9 officers, and you look at what we have to actually patrol our streets, it becomes in the high 80s. If you look at like urban, cities with our population density, we're like understaffed for patrol. It's just one of the reasons our overtime budget is so high and why I'm always piecemealing foot patrol is because just having like 5 or 6 police cars out for the entire city on a Saturday night and having like 1 or 2 people out, on foot is like a real stretch. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm not just trying to ask you to take it as an article of faith, but I feel like right now, and I've kind of said this on Monday, if we want to increase our social work capacity, like saving a few $100,000 a year in police positions in order to fund that, I think is like a short-term solution. I think we just have to build out a really much more robust social work capacity regardless of what we do with the police department. I mean, it's in my interest to say that, but I think it's sincere. I think the answer to our social work needs, our mental health and homeless crisis intervention needs is not going to come from the margin of like 2 or 3 police officers.
And then you talked about enhanced de-escalation.
Right.
Can you talk, what are the specifics of that and how does this budget fund that?
Right. So, I mean, one of the things that I think there's a nest of concepts. Like one is that if you want officers to be good at de-escalation, you have to actually be able to train them in scenario-based training. So I can sit here and talk to you about de-escalation all day and give you a curriculum, but that's much different than walking into a scene where people are about to go at it with, bats or knives or fists, and having to, as an actor, show that you can use those skills, also show how you can use them as a team. But every time we do that type of training, we either short patrol or have to incur overtime expenses. It's, we're staffed right now to function to do our police functions with our existing budget, and then training comes out of like shifting things around and paying overtime or shorting some of our policing functions. And that's just, I'd be happy to show you the numbers. But so number one, scenario-based training. Number two, just straight up like classroom training to as a foundation for the scenario training. Number three, like ongoing training about competency in the equipment on that truck, for example. And then number four, we talk about like the state mandates that we do implicit bias, for example, at least once a year. And we do that, but one of the counselors was very like dismissive of, and we try to get good implicit bias training, not just a slide deck, but someone was like, that's just BS. You're just doing it to check the box. I don't agree with that. But if you want to do it more, like that's money, right? And so like, if we want like what Washington, D.C. does, and where does this come into de-escalation? I think if you understand your biases and you understand your dispositions and you understand maybe how, for example, Black Americans see the police as a matter of their legacy, then you're going to handle situations like that better and in a less escalatory way. But that involves like, going beyond Vermont and slide decks to have cops understand that. If we were to go to the Slavery Museum or the Lynching Memorial or the DC Museum or bring those trainers here, like that's money, right? And I was hoping to fund some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I don't think that one time is enough for that.
Or even like just, I agree, right? And I mean, if you talk to Stephanie Seguino, you need like small bursts of consistent training over time is shown to, actually have an effect on biased behavior. But I also just think like slide decks taught by.
It just seems like it's kind of pat. Like in a
No,
certain
I
way,
agree
like,
with you.
Bring in this national expert and like congratulations, you got like the Obama expert. Like I think that's great and that's nice, but it just feels like why does it have to be always we bring in someone from the outside and we have that? Like aren't there ways that we can institutionalize it where we don't have to pay a consultant?
I would love no. That's
where we can actually institutionalize having these conversations at a departmental level where you're empowering people to really do that in a way that's not like, we just bring in like a national expert. Like that just feels frustrating to me, honestly.
I mean, maybe I see it from a different way.
All the time, so that's
Yeah.
part of it.
No. I could see where you're coming from. I felt like his training was. I'd seen. So here's where there's a slight difference. I hope. I saw the de-escalation training, the implicit bias training that we gave to our dispatchers after one of them failed to take seriously a father calling up about his daughter getting the Klan flyer. So we got de-escalation training, implicit bias training for all of our dispatchers, and it was from the academy, and it was like well-intentioned, but it was very pat. It was just like not impactful. It was done like, all right, we need 3 hours of your time, and we're just going to show a picture of a tiger, and a tiger makes you scared, and things you see in the environment have, reactions in you that you can't control. And I thought this is like people just rolling their eyes. What I liked about that gentleman from the White House is that his training is like really, really impactful. It was just excellent training. Just a cut above in quality, not just a marquee. Like people don't even, my cops don't know who he is. And when I tell them he's from the Obama administration, half of them roll their eyes. I thought his training was just excellent. Like it was the actual high quality. The thing I worry about with implicit bias training is that there's a limit to the curriculum. Like I haven't seen a development in the curriculum. It's the same premises and the same ideas and the same conceits like shown again and again and again. And I'm looking for something else, not just like you're going to get the same ideas as last time again with a new face or a new slide deck, or you're going to get them twice a year instead of once a year. I want like what's seriously, I mean, I'm being sincere, like what's next? Like, and for me, it was like just taking a broader look. Like you might, if you understand like the legacy, how slavery led to lynching, led to segregation, led to Jim Crow, led to incarceration, and you live that experience through like the right, you feel it through the right type of, that seems better than just showing the same implicit bias slide deck again.
Okay. And then the last thing,
thank you.
was that the body camera footage issue has kind of come up again, and specifically the issue of making it available to the public for free and charging a fee. Is there a way in this budget that we're able to make body camera footage more accessible to the public so that they're able to sort of see things for themselves?
Right, and so that's a two-pronged answer. One is the Supreme Court is going to decide on whether we have the right to charge anything to inspect a record or view it, right? So that is going to come, that decision will come.
I gotta say, well, the police may have their own issues, but I think it would be a disastrous thing for a local government if the Supreme Court says that we have to just produce every public record for free. The only thing disciplining the system at all, we charge a fraction of what it actually costs the city to respond to these requests. It has become, we had a day last week where we were fulfilling 7 public records requests that day. We have, times when we have an attorney working on this full time. I guess you heard me say this at the T3 MBA, I think, but I think it is an important part of the current system that we have the ability to go back to people and say, these, 500,000 documents you've asked for here are going to cost the city this much if we have to produce them all. Do you really? And we're happy to do it for you, but it's going to cost this. Are you sure, National Rifle Association, you want us to do that before, and pay us half the money before we take that step? I think if you take that, if the Supreme Court takes that away from us, we're going to be having major budget discussions in the future about how we fulfill this public function.
But in light of that,
and fulfill it against people who are weaponizing it and trying to stop our ability to function as a local government. So I think this is not a simple issue. I respect the chief's desire and where the nature of where your question is coming from, and that the issues are a little bit different here. But know that there's some complication to this.
Put that in perspective, that it cuts politically in all directions. It's not, about, the police don't want to be accountable for misconduct. Like, I got a public records request a little while ago about any time I'd ever said the word NRA or gun control. And it was from somebody who knows that we have a certain more progressive stance on gun control, and they were looking to see if there was anything they could cull from the city that they could use against us in the right political situation. And for us to be forced to produce all of that at no expense to them, but tremendous expense to ourselves, is I think what the mayor's referring to. Getting back to body cameras, it would be hypocritical of me to say what I say, which is most of our body camera stuff is either unexceptional or exculpatory, but I don't want you to be able to see it. So I assure you of one thing, even if it is the case that viewing certain body camera footage will, so if somebody wants to see their own car stop, for example, and it's them and the officer, and there's really nothing else going on out there, that's going to be free, because we don't have to do much, or almost free, because we don't have to do really any redaction, right? But if somebody wants to see a big street scene with a lot of people, Vermont law makes it clear that we have to redact anyone who's not directly involved in the incident. But that, like I said, and I see my cops doing it now, my technicians, because we've gotten a lot of body camera related work coming our way, right, with these events. They're able to do it much, much, much more quickly than before. Every second of body camera footage is 30 frames. And each frame has to be hand redacted, but they're just doing it much more quickly. So what I can promise you is that the price will continue to go down quickly over time. And that if it's the type of footage where there's not a lot of extra people around, that it should cost little or nothing. Thank you.
Councilor Roof, and I'm conscious we're at the end of the scheduled time, so people need to go now. Understood.
I'll ask a comment and a quick question, and we can follow up later on. But I'm curious as to whether or not we'd be able to legally or functionally be able to delineate between public record requests as one entity and then administer body cam footage release in a different way while still needing to adhere to different state laws, but it's just an aside. I'm curious about the parking fees. What's the current fund right now? What's the current dollar amount of uncollected parking fees?
Uncollected?
Uncollected parking fees.
We collect, maybe the way I can answer that is we collect 90% of our parking fees, fines, although the number is big of what accumulates over the years. I'd have to look that up to give you the exact number. It's not a small number, but it's the unpaid parking fines, that's what you're asking about? So, and hence the reason we went to this online payment, to try to make it easier for people to pay their tickets. If you don't pay your tickets and you pile them up, you get your car towed next time you're in town, you know? So we want to avoid that.
So you're saying 10% goes uncollected?
about
So what's
10%
10% of what's,
A million, well.
so 100,000?
Yeah, per year. It's just accumulates over the years.
what, $1 million goes unpaid, you're saying?
No, no, no,
I'm
no,
sorry.
over
Got
the
it.
years.
I didn't want to give you, okay.
No, over the years.
Over the years.
Okay, are there any further questions? If not, I'm gonna, let Chief, you got any final thoughts?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, great. Good session, thank you all. We'll be back in tomorrow. And we are adjourned at 7:25.
Just in case you didn't think you'd seen us.